Ukraine's decisive victory over the North Korean Vanguard was not merely a battlefield event. It was a window into the unraveling desperation of Moscow's war strategy. From the very beginning of Russia's full-scale invasion, one of its primary advantages had been sheer manpower. The Kremlin believed that with enough bodies and enough steel, Ukraine's defenders would collapse under the pressure. But as the war dragged into years, with heavy casualties mounting, Russia found itself increasingly reliant on irregular forces, private militias, prisoner battalions, and now, for the first time, foreign troops flown in from across the world. The arrival of North Korean soldiers was supposed to symbolize an unbreakable bond between Moscow and Pyongyang, a new axis of defiance against the West. Russian propaganda channels painted them as hardened warriors, disciplined and loyal, ready to deliver a decisive blow where Russian troops had failed. But the reality of their deployment was far more cynical. Russian commanders, stretched thin and unwilling to commit elite units, saw the North Koreans not as partners but as expendable shock troops. In their eyes, these foreign reinforcements were tools, meant to absorb casualties and buy time. When dawn broke over the battlefield, the illusion of cooperation dissolved instantly. The North Koreans advanced in tight formations lacking proper armor support, while Russian units held back, reluctant to expose themselves to Ukrainian artillery. The skies, which Pyongyang had been assured would be shielded by Russian air cover, instead belonged to Ukrainian drones and precision-guided munitions. One by one, columns of North Korean infantry were chewed apart by the relentless strikes. Intercepts later revealed that Russian artillery batteries, positioned to provide covering fire, had been ordered to stand down once Ukrainian counter-battery fire intensified. Moscow had made a cold calculation: better to let North Korean troops take the punishment than risk further losses of Russian men and equipment. For the Ukrainians, this was a rare opportunity. Their generals had anticipated the deployment and devised a counterplan designed not only to repel the assault, but to maximize its political impact. Every strike was coordinated with the goal of both military effectiveness and psychological warfare. Drones circled above, recording the devastation in real time, ensuring that the images would flood news outlets and social media feeds around the world. Ukrainian soldiers advanced cautiously but with confidence, cutting through disoriented North Korean units and leaving wreckage behind them. The effect on the battlefield was devastating, but the geopolitical consequences were even greater. For decades, North Korea had cultivated the image of an indomitable military state, willing to sacrifice everything for its survival. Now, images of its troops dying on foreign soil for Moscow's failing ambitions undermined that narrative. Families in Pyongyang, long accustomed to silence about their sons serving abroad, would begin to ask why they had been sent thousands of miles away, only to be abandoned in the heat of battle. Moscow's desperation had led it to gamble on a partnership that was already fragile, and the cost was severe. Russia had hoped to project strength by showing it could marshal allies from distant continents. Instead, it revealed weakness, that its own forces were stretched so thin that it needed to import soldiers from one of the most isolated regimes in the world. Worse still, by leaving those soldiers to die without support, Russia showed the true nature of its alliances: one-sided, exploitative, and expendable. For Ukraine and its Western backers, this was proof of a turning tide. Not only was Kyiv able to repel fresh assaults, but it could expose the Kremlin's alliances as hollow. Officials in NATO capitals seized on the footage to reinforce their message that Russia was faltering. Analysts pointed out that if Moscow was willing to betray Pyongyang so openly, then what did that mean for its other supposed partners? Iran, Belarus, even China, states watching closely, would have to calculate whether an alliance with Russia was worth the inevitable cost of betrayal. Within Ukraine, the victory was hailed as more than a tactical success. Soldiers at the front lines described the battle as a moment of vindication, proof that their sacrifices had not been in vain. Commanders emphasized the precision of their operations, highlighting how coordination with Western intelligence and equipment allowed them to dismantle enemy advances with ruthless efficiency. Civilians, watching footage broadcast by state media, saw it as another sign that their nation's resilience could withstand any challenge, no matter how unexpected. The most damning blow, however, was psychological. The world saw North Korean troops, often portrayed as faceless, robotic fighters shattered and fleeing under Ukrainian fire. They were not the unstoppable vanguard Moscow had promised, but a vulnerable, poorly supported force left to be slaughtered in fields they had no reason to be in. Moscow's willingness to sacrifice them without hesitation broadcast a chilling message. Russia had no regard for the lives of its allies, only for its own survival. In the end, Ukraine's victory over the North Korean Vanguard was not just another battle in a long war. It was a revelation of how desperate Moscow had become, how thin its resources were stretched, and how fragile its alliances truly were. The use of foreign soldiers, followed by their abandonment, undermined Russia's credibility more than any speech or sanction could have. The Kremlin had hoped to gain strength by borrowing troops from abroad, but instead, it revealed itself as a power willing to sacrifice anyone, even supposed friends, to delay the inevitable. That truth would echo long after the smoke of battle cleared. The Don disaster did not only reveal the collapse of a military operation, it signaled a deeper shift in the trajectory of the war. For Ukraine, the destruction of North Korea's vanguard was proof that its defenses could withstand even unexpected threats. For Russia, the betrayal of Pyongyang exposed a dangerous flaw in its global alliances, shaking the fragile trust it had built with nations willing to support its war indirectly. The consequences reached far beyond the battlefield. From the Ukrainian perspective, the battle was a showcase of preparation, discipline, and the effective use of Western-backed systems. Military planners in Kyiv had anticipated that Russia might introduce new elements into the fight, whether from private mercenary companies, prisoner battalions, or foreign allies desperate to prove their loyalty. The arrival of North Korean troops was dramatic, but it was not unforeseen. Intelligence reports had already suggested that Moscow was reaching beyond its borders to supplement its bleeding manpower. Ukraine turned that knowledge into a tactical advantage. The timing of the counteroffensive, executed at dawn when the vanguard was most vulnerable, demonstrated Ukraine's growing ability to dictate the rhythm of combat. No longer was Ukraine merely reacting to Russian movements. It was shaping the battlefield, luring its enemy into traps, and using the opponent's own overconfidence against them. The footage of shattered columns and disorganized infantry symbolized more than a localized victory. It suggested that Russia's ability to introduce new variables was being neutralized with increasing efficiency. On the Russian side, however, the message was damning. In sacrificing North Korean troops so readily, Moscow showed that its commitment to alliances was transactional and expendable. This was a problem not just for Pyongyang but for every state considering deeper cooperation with Russia. Leaders in Tehran, Beijing, and Minsk watched carefully, calculating what this abandonment might mean for them. If Moscow was willing to treat North Korean lives as fodder for delaying tactics, what guarantee did others have that their support would not be used and discarded in the same manner? The diplomatic fallout was immediate. South Korea, already wary of North Korea's rumored involvement, issued sharp condemnations, warning of escalated consequences if Pyongyang deepened its role in the conflict. Western capitals seized the opportunity to highlight Russia's desperation, framing the incident as evidence that the Kremlin's so-called allies were nothing more than pawns. Even China, usually cautious in its commentary, maintained an unusual silence, signaling discomfort with the optics of Moscow throwing its partners to the wolves. Ukraine capitalized on this narrative with precision. The government released drone footage and official statements within hours, framing the event as both a military success and a geopolitical turning point. By portraying Russia as a power willing to betray its allies, Kyiv undermined Moscow's credibility in front of a global audience. At the same time, Ukrainian leaders emphasized their own resilience, showcasing the battle as proof that even when faced with unexpected forces, their defenses held strong and their strategy prevailed. For the Ukrainian people, the symbolism of the Dawn disaster resonated deeply. After months of grinding war, with sacrifices mounting in every city and village, the destruction of a foreign vanguard carried emotional weight. It reinforced the narrative that Ukraine was not only defending itself, but also exposing the rot at the heart of Russia's war machine. Civilians who had endured sleepless nights under bombardments could now look at the images of retreating enemy forces and believe, if only briefly, that justice was being served on the battlefield. For North Korea, the consequences were humiliating. The regime had long cultivated an image of unwavering strength, claiming that its military